So in the first video, Password Require, we showed you how the module on Drupal.org works. Now in this video, we're going to show you how to make this basic functionality in a very simple two-function module. So this is the .module file of the Password Require in the learning version. And this version only has two functions. So the first function is Password Require Form Alter, and this implements the Drupal hook form alter. So this allows you to alter any form in the Drupal system. So every time Drupal makes a form, it's going to call this function as well as the other hook form alter functions and other modules, and it's going to allow us to alter all forms on the site. And this will allow us to add password protection to any form on the site. So the first thing we do is we get the password protected forms. So in this version of the module, there's not a UI for setting the forms, but it is actually done through a variable. So we get a variable called Password Require Forms, and the second argument to this function is an array, an empty array, and basically if we have nothing set in this variable, it's going to tell us, well, there's an empty array, meaning there's no forms currently protected. So without a UI, how we set the forms in this array is through the settings.php file. So if we look at our copy of the settings.php file at the very bottom, and this is the same file where you would set the database connection for your Drupal site, we have this conf password require forms. So you're basically setting an element to an array, and Drupal is going to then set this as a variable value. And we have just set 3 form IDs here: the site information, the user admin permissions page, and the file system settings. So if we look in the browser at the file systems page, we have a password protection here, and the site information is also password protected. So nobody can submit these forms unless they enter their correct password. So back to the code, once we've got the protected forms, the hook form alter is going to pass us the form, which is the actual form elements, the state of the form, and then what we're concerned about here is the form ID. So this is a unique identifier for the form on the site. So we're going to search in the array of our protected forms for the form ID that we currently have. And if we're, say, on the file system form, it will match and will go in here. If it doesn't match, then we won't protect this form. So assuming that we're dealing with a form ID that should be protected, we're going to go inside this if statement, and all we're going to do to alter the form is set one element, and we're going to call this element user password, and it's going to be of the type password. So to understand how to set the elements on the form, you'll want to look at the form API pages on Drupal.org. Basically, all of these are properties of this element. So the type property is going to be password, which just means that you're not going to be able to see anything as you type. Other things that you could put here are text area or select or text field, but for our purposes we're going to do password. And then the description is password require. This is a constant, and we can see it's defined up near the top here, and it's going to say you're required to enter your password. So the description is a little bit that goes under the password field and just tells the user what you're expecting. And then here we're using element validate. We could actually validate the whole form, but we really only need to validate the one element. So if our element validation function sets an error, then the form submit callbacks will not happen. So the element validate property basically sends this element to a function, and the function can determine whether it's valid input or not. And in our case, valid input means they have the correct user password. So to set this, we set it to an array of function names. So since we only have one function here that we need to pass it to, we're just going to use password require, password validate. So this string here needs to be the exact same as the function name. So our function is set down here. So the other thing we're doing is required, meaning they have to input this field. and then the weight is just determines where it goes on the form. So basically what happens when the form gets submitted is during the process, Drupal is going to look at each element and see if it has an element validate property, and if it does, it's going to pass the element to the validation function. So in our case, the function is down here, password require, password validate. So it's important to always name your functions the same as, they should start the same as your module name. So our module name is password underscore require. So I'm going to name this password validate. And you can see here it passes us the element and the form state. So if we wanted to see what Drupal passes to validation function on elements, then you'd want to look at the form API again on Drupal.org. So we're grabbing the global user object, and this is going to give us the object of the user who's currently logged in. So right away we're just going to grab the element value. So this is the value of the element that we're validating against, and we're going to pass the name of the current user and the value of the element, the form element they're validating, in this case the password, to this user authenticate function. So this is basically going to be name and password. So since we have the not here, we're saying that if this function does not pass, then we're going to go into this section here. And this section, basically, we have a session variable that we're keeping for the password attempts, because we only let them do 3 attempts. And the 3 attempts is defined in this constant, which is defined in the top of the screen, but we're using it other places. And so the benefit of using constants, even though it's a very simple module, is it's very easy for us, if we change our mind, to say actually we want to give them 5 attempts, that we only need to change it up near the top of the module, not in the regular logic of our module. So if they do not authenticate correctly, we go to this section. And basically what we do is we keep track of how many times they've actually failed this password test. They've failed it more times than we're giving them attempts, then we just send them directly to user/logout, and this will log them out of the Drupal site. So if they've got the password wrong, but say they've only answered it wrong twice, then we are going to call form set error, and this will basically set the form to an error state, so it won't call the submit callbacks for the form. So in our case, if we're password protecting the user permissions form, if we set form set error, it won't actually do the callback to set the permissions, so there'll be no changes to the site. So we tell that the element that we want to set an error to, and this will make it red, or basically set it to an error class, and then we give it a translatable message: your password is incorrect. Now if user authenticate comes back as true, then we go down to this section here, and it basically just resets their count, because if they got it wrong twice, we don't want to keep we want to reset this to 0, so if they have to do it again, they get 3 more chances. So basically this is the only thing we do. If they get the password right, we just reset the counter. And then because we're not calling a form validation error, if we're not doing form set error, then the form will just proceed as normal. It will call the submit callback. So that's basically the whole module right there. There's a bunch of comments in here you can take a look at to see how it works. If you have a debugger, you can step through it to see how things actually happen. But it's a very simple example of how you can add sort of powerful functionality to a Drupal site. Thanks for watching. There are more videos at 6miletech.com. Follow us on Twitter at 6miletech, or subscribe to the 6miletech YouTube channel for more updates. Thanks.